Hi, and welcome to the Emotionally Challenged podcast. This show is for anyone who at some point in their lives has struggled to manage their emotions. So if you've ever let your emotions get the best of you, if you've spiraled to the sunken place at the slightest trigger, or maybe you just want to ride the self-help train, then this podcast is for you. We'll be laughing and learning our way to a better understanding of what our emotions tell us, how they influence us, and most importantly, how we can use them to change our lives. Join in the discussion by sharing your comments and thoughts. And if you're interested in having a free, anonymous coaching session with me here on the show, you can contact me directly at hello@NicoleSeals.com, and that's Nicole with a K. Be sure to subscribe to the show and rate your favorite episode on iTunes, Podcast Addict, or Stitcher Radio. To learn more, visit my website, NicoleSeals.com, for access to articles, videos, self-help programs, and more. You can also follow me on Instagram at MyInnerTherapist or subscribe to my YouTube channel. You'll find all of my links in the show's description section. All right, enough with the intro. Let's get emotional. Hello, and welcome to the Emotionally Challenged podcast. I am your host and empowerment coach, Nicole Seals, and I want to welcome you to today's episode. We are going to be talking about emotional pain, and the question that we're going to be asking ourselves today is, are you holding on to emotional pain? Now, I bring this question to you because what we do here on the show, what I do in my practice, is to work with people and give them the tools that they need to be able to identify the emotional barriers that are showing up in their lives and preventing them from having the lives that they want. Or maybe it's really just impairing their ability to be able to engage in relationships or find fulfillment in their work. And the way that we overcome that is that we have to actually understand where these emotions are coming from and why they're there before we can actually heal them and resolve them. So we're going to get back to the basics today. And by that, I mean, we're really just going to kind of break it down and talk about what is emotional pain, because we can't really move forward in healing ourselves of it if we don't actually even understand what emotional pain is. So we're going to keep this light. We're really not going to tread into a place of bringing up our old unresolved pain and all of us just kind of, I'm sobbing and you're sobbing on the other end. We're really going to talk about this from the perspective of an observer and also from the understanding of just what emotions are. Now, what we first want to talk about is, what is emotional pain? We use this word to describe how we're feeling, and we need to get much more specific about what it is, because emotional pain is really a generic label that we give to the negative emotions that come up for us. And not only come up for us, but tend to linger and show up in our lives in different forms. And we need to understand why this happens, because this is what tends to serve as the barrier to us being able to move past an experience or to manage the emotions when they come up, because they're so powerful and strong and they're overwhelming, and then they take us to a place and we feel as if we've lost control. And I know everybody who's listening has had that experience of feeling as if they've lost control of their emotions. So let's talk about the different ways that emotional pain can show up in our lives. Now, I want to start off with some of the more common forms that we all seem to have some self-awareness into, which is trauma probably being the most predominant trigger for emotional pain. And trauma can mean many different things. Trauma can be the experience of having been a victim of violence. Trauma could be an experience that you had in your childhood where you were hurt or harmed or abandoned. trauma can also show up in the form of having been in a serious car accident, or maybe you witness a car accident. We have, we're living in a time where we have a lot of natural disasters that are occurring. And having been in a natural disaster or having a loved one who's been in the experience themselves, that is a form of trauma. So trauma is really the experience of having a very strong emotion that is rooted in fear or rooted in loss. And it is so powerful. It becomes so deeply embedded into our memory because of the impact that it had on our lives. Like it shifted our lives. And that could be suddenly that it shifted our lives, or this could have happened over a period of time. And so you'll find that a lot of unresolved pain that people are holding on to comes from the experience of trauma. And this is especially true for women, for us lady folks. And we are living in a time right now, and I'm so grateful that we are bringing an awareness to the plight of women and the sexual violence and assault and violations that occur against women with the Me Too movement and what we see happening sadly, in our politics right now, that women have historically held on to their trauma. We don't necessarily live in a society where we can voice our pain. What it does is it threatens. Unfortunately, it threatens men. It makes men feel incredibly vulnerable, and it brings up a lot of fear and anger for men. So as a result, and this is what we naturally do as women, we shrink ourselves and we silence ourselves, not to make others feel uncomfortable. And the same goes for men who were victims themselves of sexual assault as children or as adults. They also feel the same sense of having to be silenced and not saying anything because of the stigma attached to it. Men are less likely to share their experience because of their gender, and because that is, it's seen as being such a negative stigma of having been a victim of some type of sexual assault. So this is a really important conversation for us to be having, because just based on statistics, a number of you who are listening right now, myself included as the host of this show, are holding on to some unresolved pain as a result of some type of trauma that happened as a violation or an assault, whether you were a child or an adult. And so we need to consider that when we're thinking about where our emotional pain comes from. I also want to talk about loss. And loss is probably one of the other big triggers that causes us to have emotional pain. And loss can come to us in the form of loss of a loved one. It can be loss of a friend, of a relationship, someone that you truly cared about, and that relationship ended and you have no contact with them anymore. Or it ended poorly and you have deep regrets about how the relationship ended. It can come from the loss of a job that was important to you. It can come from the loss of a home, a loss of something that you had tremendous value in. And that's what it really boils down to. Our loss is really coming from a place of feeling as if we had something that we placed a tremendous amount of value on, and we no longer have it. And there is a hole, right? There's this gaping hole and this void that is left. And we often don't know what to do with that space. We often don't know how to heal that pain, because what we know about loss and what we're told about loss and what we're taught about loss is that it's really something that you suffer through, right? You experience loss and you have to suffer. Time will heal. And that's what we do. And sometimes we just try to tuck it away and we put it in a place where we think it won't affect us, and we try to move on with our lives. And I'm going to tell you why that doesn't work, and why that pain always finds us at the most inappropriate of moments. So I want to get into some other forms of emotional pain that you may be experiencing, and these are a little less common. They're common because they're happening all the time, but we're not fully aware that this is where emotional pain is coming from. And that can be coming from the place of shame and guilt. If you have had an experience or a relationship where you have suffered a tremendous amount of guilt, and you maybe as a child you were put in the position of taking on the guilt of the people around you, and you became very normal for you to hold that load for people. And that happens a lot to kids. That happens so often for young children, to end up having to carry the emotional burden of their parent. So a lot of the shame and guilt in working with my clients over the years, and in working with families, especially during my time as a social worker, you could see how shame and guilt were often this a part of this pathology. It was this generational, hand-me-down, where parents were often projecting their shame and their guilt onto their children, and their children then had to carry that burden and took that emotional load with them into their own adulthood and possibly their own parenting. So we have the shame and the guilt. And the other emotional pain, the other forms that emotional pain takes on is fear and anger. And I would say fear and anger are the most common. And they're also the one we tend to be so unaware of. We don't often recognize the role that our fear and our anger is playing in our daily behavior and our thoughts, how it's running our thoughts. Sometimes our fear and our anger is at the driver's seat, and it is just determining where we're going. And you can see this with people who, we talk about people who have anger management issues and how their anger is just driving their behavior, and it's almost as if they have no control. So we look at that person and think, God, they're really an angry person. But what we have to understand is at the root of that anger is fear. And that fear is an emotional pain that they've been carrying with them, that they don't know what to do with, that is unresolved, and it has to have some place to go. It has to move somewhere. And we'll talk about why that is in a minute, but it has to move somewhere. And so it comes through their behavior. And so while we're looking at that angry person and we're getting angry at the fact that they're such a pain, we don't recognize that they're in pain. And the same goes for people who are very fearful, who are very fear-based. It's a lot of that is just coming from a place of emotional pain and not knowing what to do with it. So those are some of the most common forms that our emotional pain takes on. And like I said, what we do with that often is we feel as if we don't know how to manage it, that it's really powerful, it's scary, so we ignore it and we tuck it away into a place in our mind where we think it'll never show up. And what ends up happening is we hold on to it. It doesn't ever go away, and we hold on to it. And that's the part that I want to talk to you about, is what happens to emotional pain when it's not expressed. And how do you know when you're holding on to emotional pain? The first thing that I want you to understand is, and that you need to understand, if we're going to move on and have this conversation and this dialogue and just be transparent and open about it, we've got to get real and we got to know the facts. And what you've got to understand about emotional pain and emotions in general is that they're electrical charges. They are pure energy. And by that I mean when you have an emotion within your body, within your mind, when you have an emotion, there's a chemical reaction that is taking place in your body. Emotions are triggered by a chemical reaction that is occurring within the brain. Your brain is signaling your body to have an emotional response. That chemical reaction, like all the other chemical reactions in our body, is energetic. It has an energy to it. It's an electric charge. So as all forms of energy, it needs to be expressed. It needs to move. It needs an outlet. When you have an electrical charge, it needs to move in a direction. Think about any plug or cord you have in your house. That whole cord is literally a road for an electrical charge, right? It is a contained, confined mode of transportation for an electrical charge to get to its destination. And our emotions are the same way. They're an electrical charge, and it needs to have a direction. It needs to have an outlet. It needs to be expressed. And when it doesn't, when we don't provide that for it, it finds its own way. It will map out its own course. It will decide where it's going to show up. And a part of the reason that we're even trying to become better managers of our emotion is because that we need to learn how to control that. We need to learn how to control that direction rather than just letting our emotions run amok and decide their own course. So what typically ends up happening to that energy when we don't take charge of it? There's typically two ways that we will hold on to emotional pain. The first is that what ends up happening is we choose to ignore it. We don't acknowledge it. We feel as if we don't have the tools or the skills to be able to process it and heal it, which is a lie we tell ourselves, and that's a whole nother show. So what we typically do with that emotional pain and that energy is we attach it to other experiences. So we'll temporarily tuck it away somewhere in our short-term memory, right? It's also a lot of times it gets stored there in our amygdala, that part of our brain that's just in the stress mode, the fight or flight mode, and it's just waiting for a trigger to be expressed. And that's where we'll typically hold that energy. And then when we have an experience that is similar, right? Our brain goes through this filing system before we even recognize that it's happening, but our brain will go through this filing system and it'll say, okay, I've got this new experience. It really, really resembles this other experience that is in our memory banks. So what we're going to do is we're going to attach the emotion from that old memory and we're going to attach it to this new experience. So what this person is experiencing now, they're going to feel the memories. They're going to feel the emotion, that same emotion from similar experiences that they've had before. And our brain does that automatically. That's not something that we have a conscious awareness that's happening, and our brain does that automatically. Is there a way to prevent that from happening? Yes, and it requires some self-awareness. But for now, let's just talk about the fact, let's just acknowledge the fact that we are holding on to an emotional pain, and it is then finding other experiences to attach itself to be expressed through. And this as you're sitting here listening to this, I want you to just think about a time when you had an experience and you were really surprised about how the emotions that came up for you during that experience. Like it seemed like your emotions were really powerful, or maybe they seemed even inappropriate, or maybe you were like, why am I getting so upset over this? It's like not a big deal, but it's really like either, it's pissed me off, or it's got me really upset, or I don't even like this guy, and I've known him for 2 days and I feel like I've had my heart broken. And I know you've had that experience. I know you've also had the experience where someone at work has said something to you and it just set you off and you're like, oh my God, I can't stand him. Or, I know this is relatable. And I bring these examples up because what's happening in that moment is we are attaching some type of negative emotion, some type of emotional pain to that current experience. And that it's old energy. And we're attaching it to a new experience. So the other way that we tend to hold on to our emotional pain is physically. And this is something that when I was doing holistic health consulting and working with clients about how to use their mind to change their bodies, one of the things that became so common, that I found that everybody, was just a common thread throughout all of my clients, was that emotional pain had shown up in some physical way. Like it was physically manifesting and it was causing some type of chronic condition. And whether it was migraines or back problems, oftentimes I would say the most common were some type of digestive issue. And that's anywhere from ulcers, just, not digesting food properly, having some type of problem with elimination. That's AKA constipation. And really feeling as if, oh God, there's a medical problem here, right? There's something going on medically with me. So I got to go see a doctor and I got to get on medication and I'm going to, make this problem go away. But the word chronic, when we have a chronic issue, it means that it's, it continues, it exists despite our intervention. And that usually is a really strong indicator that there might be an emotional component to the physical condition that you're experiencing. If you've had a chronic health condition and you've tried just about everything and you've taken just about every medication, I suggest you consider the possibility that there is some type of emotional component that is coming into play, some type of unresolved emotional pain that may be showing up and is a major contributing factor to the existence of this condition. If you just feel physical pains in your body, if you feel stiffness in your neck, that's one of my common areas where I hold a lot of my pain and my stress and my anxiety is in my neck and my shoulders. There's times I found myself I literally feel like my shoulders are right underneath my earlobes. And I have to take my own hands and press down my shoulders and remind myself not to hold them up, not to have that kind of rigidity. And usually if I, in those moments, can practice some meditation or bring myself to a place of awareness, the shoulders will drop automatically. So those are some just examples of how we physically will hold on to emotional pain. And I want you to just kind of right now, just take inventory of your body. Just kind of do a little mental scan from head to toe. And as you do that, I want you to just think about where you believe your emotional pain might be showing up in your body. Where you feel, as you go through that mental scan from your head all the way down to your toes, I want you to just think about where you think your emotional pain lives. Where do you think that it is set up shop? That it's squatting? What part of your body is your emotional pain becoming an illegal squatter? Like it's just made its home in that place in your body and it's just in there wrecking stuff. So I want you to think about that because that's one of the first steps in how we go about healing ourselves and healing our emotional pain is we've got to know where it's showing up in our lives. So let's talk about the healing part because that is the most important part because each and every one of us, I don't care what your background is, what your skill level is, what you think your intelligence level is, each and every one of us has the ability. We have a universal intelligence at our fingertips, right? It's in us. It's in every part of us. It's running your body without you even being aware and having to do anything. It's making your heart beat, right? The same universal intelligence is the thing that allows us to heal ourselves. We have the ability to heal ourselves. And we just have to learn how to go about doing that. Now, I will tell you that when you are holding on to emotional pain, when you have some unresolved emotional pain in your life, The way that you go about healing that is you have to give it expression. You've heard me say that at least 6-7 times in this episode. And that's because it is so vitally important to healing yourself, is the expression of that emotional pain. You have to allow the expression of the emotion and the energy that is attached to it. You must give it direction. You must allow it to have a course where it burns itself out, right? Energy has a life. There's a lifetime to it, right? And we just want to give it that lifetime expression to the point that it is no longer powerful. It no longer has any type of ability to affect change in our lives. So the expression of that energy can happen in a number of different ways. What we see most of the time, is that energy is being expressed physically. And I think that's our go-to, right? That's kind of just the default setting that we're all on, is that emotion. We express our emotion physically and verbally. Those are the most common ways. Physically being that let's talk about anger and fear. If we're holding on to the emotional pain of anger and fear, we'll act that out physically, right? Maybe we'll hit something. Hopefully it's not a person, but maybe we'll hit something. Or maybe we're just, we're slamming things, or we're taking it out on ourselves. Self-harming is an expression of emotional pain. For those of you who never quite understood why somebody would cut themselves or pull out their hair and inflict pain on themselves, is that they are expressing that energy. They are expressing their emotional pain. You hear people talk about, I get a relief from it. And that's where the relief comes from. It's because they are taking that energy and it is finding a way, they're giving it direction. Now, it's not healthy. It's on the other end causing further pain. So we have to find more healthy ways to physically express emotional pain. And the best one that I can come up with off the top of my head is exercise. Some form of exercise or movement, whether it's running, whether it's going and walking in nature, or maybe you're just dancing. Maybe if you love to dance like me, maybe it's going and dancing. That is an amazing tool to be able to express your emotional pain and heal it in the process. So you have the physical manifestation, right? The physical expression. And then you have verbal. Verbal is powerful. I think it's just as powerful as the physical expression. What verbal does, though, and the reason why I've been doing this work and working with clients and been in the field of mental health and counseling for so long is because I believe in helping people discover their own innate abilities to transform their lives. I don't think that we need to live a life in pain here. I think pain is a normal part of life, but I do not think that suffering was the place that we were meant to live. I think that we were meant to grow through suffering, not go through it, grow through it. So what we do with the verbal expression of our emotional pain is we give it a narrative, right? When we talk about it, when we can share it with someone else, we give it a narrative. We have a story about the pain. And the beauty of that, this is the part that I love. The beauty of that is that you also can be the creator of that narrative. You are the creator of that narrative. You get to decide what the emotional pain means to you. You get to decide what the experience meant to you. You get to determine how that's going to affect you in your tomorrows. And one of the things that I practice with clients and will practice here on the show, and I have a number of guides and tools at my website to help people learn how to do this, is the practice of reframing, right? So reframing is something that, if you've ever been in therapy or counseling, your therapist probably has used the technique of reframing with you. And that's really just taking a belief or thought or story that we've told ourselves, and it's retelling it in a way that empowers us. It's not lying to ourselves. And I've heard a number of my clients be like, well, I feel like I'm lying to myself. I was like, well, how are you lying if you're the creator of your experience? That's your experience. No one else's perspective matters. You get to determine what that means to you. So it can never be a lie. It just becomes your belief. And why wouldn't we choose a belief that empowers us, especially when there's so much emotional pain that's attached to it? So as we look at this experience and we think, okay, like when it first happened, it was so painful and it was really hurtful, and I felt like I lost a part of myself, and I started questioning my self-worth, and I just, my identity, like, who am I now? And those are usually the thoughts that we have when we go through some kind of emotionally painful experience. And as you practice reframing, as you get better with understanding how reframing works, that narrative and that story can shift, and it can move to a place of, yeah, that happened. I understand now why that happened, because when that experience showed up and I had that altercation with that person and I used those particular words, that came from a place of where I was really hurt. And it reminded me of the experience I had with my mom and the things that she used to say to me. And I can see that now as I look at it. As I look back at the experience now, I can see that I was that 8-year-old little girl, and that's how I was responding. So I'm actually really grateful for that experience, because it's brought me some self-awareness. And it's actually helped me to become much better at identifying what type of relationship I don't want, or the type of person that is my trigger, or the type of person that doesn't see my value or questions my worth. So I know now, because of that experience, that I need to stay away from those people, that it's not in my best interest to have those type of people in my lives. So can you see how when you reshape your story and your narrative about that experience, going from, oh God, it broke me and I don't know who I am anymore and it's so hurtful and I hate to think about it, to telling the story of, I remember it was bad, and I can see now of I was just acting out some other pain that I was holding on to, and this is what I'm going to do as I move into the future. It becomes your teacher. The experience isn't your captor anymore. It becomes your teacher. And reframing is the tool that helps you to be able to change that story. So verbal expression of emotional pain is so important, because if you can learn the tools to be able to shift the story, then you learn how to shift your emotions about it, right? The emotional pain that was attached to it before gets expressed through the creation of this new story, and then it dissipates. It either dissipates and the emotional pain dissipates, or it's replaced by much more powerful, positive emotions. And that's the ultimate goal. That's what we're trying to do here. Is we're not here to lie to ourselves. We're not here to repeat mantras over and over again, thinking that it's going to change our subconscious mind. Well, maybe we are, but not necessarily mantras. Again, another show. What we're here to do is we're just here to become better managers of our emotions. We're here to become healers and creators of our tomorrows. And that's what this is all about. So I hope that your takeaway from today is a little seed being planted to where now you just start to have more awareness of where in your body you're carrying your emotional pain, how you may be holding on to it. And if you're aware of the energy that's attached to it, that's what I really want you to think about. And we'll talk more about this much more in depth as we move through the show this year, and just get a better understanding of our emotions and how they've been governing our lives, and how we can change that, and how we can start to become better managers and be more or shall I say less emotionally challenged. All right, so that's going to do it for us today. Your homework then is this bit of advice. I want you to discover and unleash your inner therapist. I want you to believe in the power of your thoughts because they will heal your pain and they will help you to create your tomorrows. Until next time, friends.